Further debate? Whose turn is it? Further debate for Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. It's always an honor to rise and speak in the House. And today I'm speaking on second reading of Bill 165, a bill that should really be called Keeping Energy Costs Down for Enbridge, because it's certainly not keeping energy costs down for gas customers in this province. Speaker, what this bill is doing, it is forcing existing ratepayers, people who currently use methane fossil gas in their homes, to subsidize the hookup of new fossil gas infrastructure in our province in order to support a company that had profits of $16.5 billion last year and whose CEO earns a nice salary of $19 million a year. I don't think Enbridge needs a subsidy. I think the people of Ontario could use a bit of a break, but certainly not Enbridge. So what is the implications of taking the unprecedented step for the first time in Ontario history to overturn an OEB decision? What are the implications for the people of this province? Well, Enbridge is going to save $250 million a year just up front. But what does that mean for existing gas customers in Ontario? Well, if you take this complete decision, according to Environmental Defence, Enbridge is going to save around $2 billion over the 5 years of this decision, which equals $600 per fossil gas customer in Ontario. So I just want the people of this province to understand what is happening here. Enbridge is getting a subsidy, and it's going to cost you, if you use fossil gas in this province, on average $600 a person. I think that's a bad deal, at least for the people of Ontario. Pretty good deal for the $19 million man and his company Enbridge, but certainly not a good deal for the people of Ontario. Speaker, if there was no other alternative or no other option for people, or if developers had no other way of heating and cooling people's homes, then maybe you could make an argument that such a subsidy for Enbridge costing ratepayers so much money would be justified. But it's not. Because as the OEB decision, and I mind you, the OEB decision was based on input from hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders, producing thousands and thousands of pages of documentation to justify this decision, that it would actually be cheaper for people to heat and cool their homes with heat pumps. So not only is the government taking the unprecedented step of overturning this OEB decision, they're actually doing it to disincentivize developers putting in technology that will be cheaper. As a matter of fact, over the average life cycle cost of a heat pump versus a gas furnace, those new homeowners will have 13% lower cost. So we're asking ratepayers to subsidize Enbridge, for new homeowners to have more expensive heating and cooling in their homes. And according to the OEB decision, if you look at if you actually take the time to read the decision, there will be no incremental cost increases for developers if they put in heat pumps and don't do the initial gas hookups in the first place. And so not only are we risk forcing new homeowners to have a more expensive heating system, this bill will also force them to have a stranded asset. So even this government with its weakened climate targets, says we should be net zero by 2050. So my calculation is it's 2024, so 2050 is less than 30 years from now. And if we have any hope of being net zero, we cannot be heating our homes with fossil gas. So why is the government imposing a 40-year amortization schedule, which means they're making calculations for gas furnaces way beyond 2050? So by definition, they're going to be forcing existing homeowners to have a stranded asset that will then cost them even more money to replace so we can meet our net zero targets. Speaker, this is also going to have implications for our economy. In 2022, the green energy transition, according to Bloomberg, resulted in investments around the world of $1.3 trillion. Over half of that in low-cost renewable energy, primarily wind and solar, because the prices have come down so much. That investment in 2023 rose to $1.8 trillion. That kind of growth is going to continue each and every year moving forward. I want Ontario to be a global leader in what is now a $1.8 trillion economic opportunity. Now, according to Bloomberg, still about half of that investment is wind and solar. A growing amount of that investment is in electric vehicles, and I'll say finally Ontario is starting to catch up and make investments in electric vehicles, but a growing percentage of that investment is in alternative heating sources like heat pumps. As a matter of fact, according to the International Energy Agency, heat pump installations are growing at double-digit rates around the world. No more so than in Europe, where we saw a 40% increase in heat pump installations last year. As a matter of fact, the EU's target is that 60 million additional heat pumps will be installed by 2030. So Ontario has an amazing opportunity to not only be a leader in electric vehicles, but to be a leader in manufacturing heat pumps. But in order to do that, we actually need a government that believes in a technology that's going to save us money. And I know some people have said, oh, these heat pumps, do they work in cold weather? Absolutely, they do, to minus 30 degrees. As a matter of fact, the countries in Europe that have installed the most heat pumps are the Scandinavian countries, which have cold climates very similar to Canada. So, Speaker, I want to close by saying what are the implications of this decision. You know, the government has spent the last few months opposing carbon pricing, a price on pollution, because they say there are other ways to address the climate crisis. Well, those other ways are through regulations and through investments in technology that result in decarbonization. But the government's opposed to that too, because that's exactly what this Bill 165 does. It says we're, as a province, even though the independent energy regulator says the way to go is not in expensive gas, but in lower cost alternatives like heat pumps, but instead of actually putting in place a regulatory regime that would encourage that, the government's opposed to that. So I don't know what the government's for. I mean, they're going to ramp up gas plants for electricity, increasing carbon pollution by 400%. Even though we are at a time where the costs of the climate crisis are escalating, we see it each and every day, and the government seems to be opposed to any and all solutions.
It is now time for questions and answers. I recognize the member for Brampton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his presentation this morning. And I appreciate his clarity on his position on the carbon tax. I think it's clear that the Green Party leader supports carbon taxes and an increased carbon tax. Of course, on the PC side, we're the only party that's actually fighting to scrap the carbon tax. I also have his position on nuclear power. On a recent decision we made around refurbishing Pickering nuclear, not only ensuring saving our grid, but also saving jobs. And he says, it makes no sense for the government to pour billions into keeping it operational when lower-cost, cleaner solutions are available. The Ford government is making Ontario's grid dirtier and more expensive by prioritizing the costly, poor-performing Pickering plant. So I just, in the member's mind, we should all be on heat pumps and to heat our homes. I'm just wondering, how would this member, if he won't stand up for nuclear, how are we going to power the grid to make this happen for the member?
Back to the member for Guelph for response.
Thanks. I appreciate the member's question. I believe in investing in the lowest cost, cleanest solutions to our energy needs. So I've been very clear. I support the rebuilding of Darlington and Bruce. We know that nuclear power is going to be part of Ontario's energy mix for decades to come. Pickering, I believe, is a huge mistake. Of the 65 operating nuclear plants in North America, Pickering is consistently rated as the 64th poorest performing plant. I don't know who pours money into such a poor performing asset, especially when the cost of wind and solar has come down so much that if we invested in low-cost renewables, it would cost us less for cleaner power. That's exactly why of the $1.8 trillion being invested in the clean energy transition right now, over half.
Further questions? I recognize the member for Spadina-Fort York.
I want to thank the member from Guelph for his comments today on Bill 165, the raising costs for gas customers across the province. And I just want to go through some of the figures, make sure I got the figures right. I do appreciate them. You said that right now, with this bill, the government's actually proposing that anybody who's buying Enbridge gas, who's an Enbridge gas customer, is going to be subsidizing the expansion of their lines by $600. And that's the cost to each individual customer. And then you said that the people who are the new customers for Enbridge, they're going to be paying 13% more over the life of a gas furnace, than they would have if they had a heat pump. So those are the numbers. And I will tell you, is this the only example that you know of where this government is squandering our tax dollars in order to support a private for-profit corporation? I'll give just one example from my own riding. Ontario Place, this government's giving Therma $650 million tax dollars. So do you have other examples?
Member from Guelph for response.
Well, I appreciate the member's question. I would add agency nursing to that, and just the increasing privatization of our healthcare system, where people are being forced to pay more for less. But let's stick to this particular bill. It's just outrageous to think that existing gas customers are going to pay $600 more to subsidize a $16 billion company with a $19 million CEO. I remember when the government used to complain about the $6 million man at Hydro One. Let's talk about the $19 million man at Enbridge that they're subsidizing. And on top of that, these new homeowners are going to have a heating system that costs them 13% more. That's what it says in the OEB decision.
We have time for one last question. I recognize the member for Kiiwetinoong.
Miigwech, Speaker, just a quick question. I know that in the north, we do our heating with wood stoves. And sometimes I see people selling their wood in sled loads. A sled load is like, $150, $200 for a sled load. And that, depending on the weather, that lasts probably 3 days to maybe a week at most, at best.
Question?
How is this going to bill? How will this bill help those people?
Back to the member for 10-second response.
People, first of all, high-efficiency wood furnaces, let's make them available to everyone. And better yet, let's make heat pumps free of charge. PEI is doing it for every household under $100,000. Why don't we make heat pumps free to people in the north?